My name is Maya Harrison. I'm 30 years old now, but this all started 5 years ago when I inherited $36 million and kept it a secret from my family. Before I tell you how I ended up owning every penny of their debt and confronting them at their bankruptcy hearing, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It's a long story, but I promise you the ending is worth it. It began on the coldest day in November, the kind of day in Vermont where the wind feels like tiny shards of glass against your skin. We were at my grandmother Margaret Whitmore's funeral. The air in the small wood-paneled chapel was stale, thick with the cloying scent of wilting lilies, and my mother's expensive, overpowering perfume. I sat in the back pew, a solitary island in a sea of dark suits and somber dresses. From my vantage point, I watched my family. My mother, Karen, was dabbing at her perfectly dry eyes with a silk tissue. Her expression was less about grief and more about impatience. My stepfather, Rick, had his arm around her, whispering what I assumed were comforting words, but his eyes kept darting around the room, sizing up the other mourners, perhaps calculating the net worth of their grief. And then there was my half-brother, Logan. He was hunched over, the glow of his phone screen illuminating his face from below, making him look ghoulish. He was probably texting, pitching another one of his genius app ideas that would inevitably crash and burn, taking a chunk of our parents' money with it. They were my family. But in that moment, watching them perform their pantomime of sorrow, they felt like complete strangers. After the service, we gathered in the church basement for a small reception. The flimsy paper plates and weak coffee only seemed to highlight the grasping nature of the conversation. My family wasted no time. They gathered like vultures, not to reminisce about the woman who had just died, but to mentally auction off her belongings. "I should get the china, of course," Karen said, her voice a little too loud, ensuring everyone within earshot could hear her stake her claim. "Margaret always said it would be mine one day." "What about that old grandfather clock in the hall?" Rick chimed in, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "That's a genuine antique. Could be worth a pretty penny." Logan, ever the pragmatist, just wanted her car, a 10-year-old, reliable sedan. It was a significant upgrade from the rust bucket he currently drove, which was held together by duct tape and wishful thinking. I couldn't stand to listen to it. A knot of something cold and hard twisted in my stomach. It was a familiar feeling, one I'd had my whole life in their presence. As they began to bicker over who had been closer to Margaret, a man with a kind, weary face and a perfectly tailored suit approached me. He was David Chun, my grandmother's lawyer for over 40 years, a man who radiated a quiet competence that made my family's noise seem even more crass. He didn't say a word to me, just gave a small, sad smile, and handed me a small, polished mahogany box with a simple brass lock. It felt heavy in my hands, far heavier than its size suggested. "She wanted you to have this, Maya," he said. His voice was a low murmur meant only for me. "And only you." Her instructions were very clear. I nodded, unable to speak, clutching the box like a lifeline. Excusing myself with a mumble, I slipped out of the church basement, the sound of their squabbling fading behind me. I didn't go back to the empty house. I went to the one place that ever felt truly like mine, the small, dusty bookstore I managed on Main Street. That night, surrounded by the quiet, comforting company of a million stories, I sat in my small, cluttered office. With trembling fingers, I found the small, old-fashioned key taped to the bottom of the box. I inserted it into the lock. It turned with a soft, satisfying click. I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded blue velvet, was a single thick envelope sealed with wax and another smaller, more intricate key. I picked up the letter. Her elegant, familiar handwriting covered the page. Taking a deep, shaky breath, I broke the seal and began to read. "My dearest Maya," it began, "the world will try to tell you who you are. Your family will try to tell you who you are. Don't believe them. This is the truth." The air in my small office suddenly felt thin, hard to breathe. I read the first page of the letter, then read it again. The words seemed to swim before my eyes, refusing to assemble into a coherent thought. $36 million. The number was so vast, so astronomical, it felt like a typo. A vast portfolio of real estate, blue-chip stocks, and municipal bonds. A silent, formidable empire built by my grandmother. The woman who wore cardigans with patched elbows and drove a 10-year-old sedan, Whitmore Holdings. It wasn't just a name on a letterhead. It was a fortress of financial independence, and now the letter stated in plain, unambiguous terms, it was all mine. The smaller key, the letter explained, was for a safe deposit box that contained all the physical share certificates, property deeds, and bearer bonds. The letter itself was the legal instrument, her holographic will, with David Schoen as the executor. But it was the pages that followed, written in a slightly shakier, more urgent hand that truly stole the breath from my lungs and replaced it with ice. "This money, my girl, is a tool," she wrote. "It can build houses, fund educations, and create opportunities. But it can also be a cage, a gilded one perhaps, but a cage nonetheless. That is why I am giving you this warning. The most important advice I will ever impart. Do not tell them. Do not tell your mother or Rick or Logan. Not yet. The moment they know," she wrote, "the dynamic you have known your entire life will not just change, it will be obliterated. They will stop seeing a daughter or a sister. They will see a walking safe, a solution to all their problems, a means to their selfish ends. Their love, if it truly exists, will be buried under an avalanche of need and expectation. Let them think you have nothing, Maya. Let them continue to see you as the quiet, unambitious bookstore manager. It is the only way to find out if you truly have anything at all with them. It is a painful test, I know, but it is a necessary one. Observe them. Listen to them. And when their true nature reveals itself, you will find instructions for a contingency plan in the back of my old journals, which are in the safe deposit box. A plan to protect yourself, a plan to enforce reality." A cold dread, sharp and familiar, washed over me. It was as if she had been a ghost in our home for the past 2 decades, witnessing every dismissive word, every condescending smile, every casual cruelty I had endured. She knew. She had always known. The next day, I met David Schoen at his downtown office. It was a world away from my bookstore. All polished mahogany, soft leather chairs that sighed when you sat in them, and the quiet, confident hum of serious money. David was perfectly professional, offering me coffee and condolences, but I could see the question, the assessment, in his eyes. He was Margaret Whitmore's loyal soldier, her confidant for 40 years. Now he was looking at her 25-year-old granddaughter, a quiet woman who ran a bookstore and made maybe $30,000 a year. And he was wondering if I was worthy of the trust Margaret had placed in me. "Your grandmother was the most brilliant woman I have ever known, Maya," he said, sliding a thick, leather-bound binder across the vast expanse of his desk. She was also very specific. This binder contains an overview of the assets, the starting point. But her instructions to me were more personal. He leaned forward, his hands steepled on the desk. "She told me to guide you, but not to lead you, to advise, but not to decide. She has given you a kingdom, Maya, but she was adamant that you must prove you have the character to rule it." His gaze was intense. "So tell me, what are your first thoughts after reading her letter?" He was testing me, right here, right now. He wanted to see if I was thinking about a new car, a bigger house, a glamorous vacation. I thought of the disappointment on my mother's face when I told her I was majoring in literature. "What are you going to do with that?" she'd asked, her voice dripping with disdain. "Read to people for a living?" I thought of the time I brought home a boyfriend I really cared for, Peter, a smart, thoughtful architect who made me laugh until I cried. Karen had been politely cold to him the entire evening and later told me I should be aiming higher. "My first thought," I said slowly, meeting David's gaze, "is that my grandmother was right, and I'm scared she was right." A flicker of something, surprise, respect, passed through David's eyes. He leaned back in his chair. "Go on." "She saw them so clearly," I continued, the words tumbling out now. "My whole life, I've been the responsible one, the old soul, the one who doesn't try hard enough. That was all just a story they told themselves, so they didn't have to feel guilty about pouring all their time, energy, and money into Logan. As long as I was the stable, boring one, they could justify chasing his flashy, high-risk dreams." I took a breath. "The money, it doesn't feel real yet. What feels real is her warning, and her test." David Schoen nodded slowly, a small, thoughtful smile touching his lips. "She once told me, 'Character is what you do when no one is watching.' She believed you had it, Maya. My job is to help you prove it." The contingency plan she mentioned, it is formidable, but it is a nuclear option. My advice is to live your life, observe, and hope you never have to use it. I spent the next week in a daze, living a strange double life. By day, I was Maya Harrison, the quiet woman who could recommend a good mystery novel and who fretted over the store's thin profit margins. By night, I was the sole heir to a fortune, poring over financial statements and legal documents I barely understood. My grandmother's warning was a constant, chilling whisper in my ear. The first direct test came sooner than I expected. It was the week before Thanksgiving, a time of year that always filled me with a sense of low-grade dread. I was at the bookstore, pricing a new shipment of paperbacks, when my phone buzzed. The caller ID read, Mom. I braced myself and answered, Hi, Mom. Honey, how's my favorite little bookworm? Her voice was bright, airy, and utterly false. It was her I'm about to ask for something voice. I'm fine, Mom. Just at work. Oh, that's nice. That little store of yours. Then her voice shifted, turning syrupy and hopeful. Listen, I have the most wonderful news. Logan is on the verge of a major breakthrough. He's designed a new social media platform, something revolutionary for pet owners. He says the investors are lining up, but he just needs a little bit of seed money to get the prototype finalized. Rick and I have helped all we can. You know how it is. My stomach tightened. Here it comes. And we were just thinking, you've been so responsible your whole life, always saving your money. Could you possibly see your way to helping your brother out? He just needs a small loan to get him over the finish line. Say, $50,000? $50,000. She said it so casually, like she was asking to borrow a cup of sugar. My mind flashed back to my own college graduation dinner a few years earlier. It had been a stilted, awkward affair at a local Olive Garden. I'd graduated summa cum laude, the first in our family to get a degree, let alone one with honors. I'd been bursting with pride. I remember trying to tell them about my thesis, about my dream of one day owning my own publishing house. Rick had cut me off mid-sentence, clapping Logan on the back with a loud thud. Speaking of achievements, Rick had boomed, loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. Guess who just got the new Mustang? A gift from his proud parents. You've got to look the part for these venture capitalists, right, son? Logan had grinned, jingling the keys. It's all about the image, Dad. You've got to project success to be successful. My degree, my 4 years of hard work, were instantly forgotten. My achievement didn't have chrome wheels or a roaring V8 engine. It wasn't image, it was just me. And that was never, ever enough. Now, standing in the quiet sanctuary of my bookstore, holding a phone that connected me to a $36 million reality, that memory burned hot and fresh. All those years of being the responsible one, the quiet one, the disappointment, it was all a convenient narrative they had constructed, a role they had cast me in so they could pour all their resources and attention into the golden child, the one who reflected the flashy, successful image they so desperately craved for themselves. The temptation was a physical thing, a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth. I could do it. I could write the check. With a few strokes of a pen, I could become the hero. I could buy their attention, their praise, their fleeting admiration. I could finally be enough in their eyes. But my grandmother's words, her prescient warning, echoed in my head, a walking safe. The image was so clear, so painfully vivid. That's all I would ever be to them. Not a daughter, not a sister, a solution, a resource to be tapped until it ran dry. I took a deep breath. The smell of old paper and ink grounded me, reminding me of the real things I valued. Mom, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, I can't give you a $50,000 loan. The silence on the other end was instantaneous and frigid. The fake cheerfulness evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard edge. What do you mean you can't, Maya? This is for your brother. This is for the family. I don't have that kind of money, Mom. You know that. My salary barely covers my rent and bills. I manage a bookstore. Don't you dare give me that pathetic excuse, she snapped, her voice turning sharp and ugly, the mask completely off now. You're just being selfish. You always have been. Content to hide away in your dusty little world, never thinking about anyone else. Your brother is out there trying to build a future for all of us, and you won't even lift a finger to help. I don't know why I even bother with you. You are a disappointment. The line went dead. I stood there for a long, silent moment. The phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone. My hand was shaking, not with rage, but with a profound, hollow sadness. It wasn't the insults that got me. It was the predictability of it all. My grandmother had seen this exact moment coming. She knew them so well. She knew that their love was conditional, their support a transaction. My coworker, Maria, a woman in her late 60s with a no-nonsense attitude and a heart of gold, walked past the open office door. She paused, her sharp eyes taking in my pale face. "You okay, kid?" she asked gently. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I attempted a smile, but I'm sure it looked more like a grimace. "Just a call from home, Maria." She nodded, her eyes full of a sad, worldly understanding. "Ah, family. They're the only ones who can press the buttons because they're the ones who installed them in the first place." She was right. But what she didn't know, what no one in the world knew except for me and David Chun, was that I finally had the power to change the wiring. That night, I didn't go home. I went back to my office, the bookstore dark and silent around me. I pulled out my grandmother's key and drove to the bank in the next town. I accessed the safe deposit box for the first time. Inside, along with stacks of deeds and certificates, were 5 leather-bound journals. I took the most recent one. Back in my office, I turned to the final section, the one marked with a small, discreet tab, the Whitmore Contingency. It was a detailed, step-by-step plan for the methodical legal acquisition of debt. It was a blueprint for a siege. My hands were steady now. The hurt had cooled, hardened into a clear, sharp resolve. I picked up my phone and dialed David Chun's private number. He answered on the second ring. "Maya," he said, his voice neutral, waiting. "I understand now," I said, my own voice low and determined. "I understand what she meant. I gave them the chance. They will never change." I paused, taking one last deep breath before crossing a line I knew I could never uncross. "The contingency plan. We need to enact it. Let's get everything ready. Tell me what the first step is." There was a moment of silence on the other end. Then, for the very first time, I heard something other than professional courtesy in David Chun's voice. I heard the sound of a loyal soldier acknowledging his new commander. I heard respect. "Very well, Maya," he said. "The first step is to establish a holding company, something anonymous, untraceable, back to you or your grandmother's estate. It's time to get to work." The next 6 months were a masterclass in duality. To my family and to the world, I was the same old Maya, the quiet, disappointing daughter who worked at the bookstore, the one they called when they needed to vent about Logan's latest almost success, or to pointedly ask if I was ever going to do something meaningful with my life. I dutifully attended the excruciating Thanksgiving dinner, where I was seated at the kids' table, metaphorically speaking. I was forced to listen to Rick boast about Logan's impressive pitch meetings to major players, a narrative that conveniently left out the part where those meetings resulted in nothing but polite rejections. I watched my mother look at me with that familiar mixture of pity and disdain, as if my quiet, stable life was a personal affront to her own ambitions. Through it all, I just smiled, nodded, and passed the gravy. I was a ghost at their table, and that's exactly what I needed them to see. But in the evenings, my little office, smelling of old books and brewing coffee, transformed into a war room. David Chun became my general, and I, his eager, if initially overwhelmed, cadet. He didn't just give me orders. He made me learn the terrain. He sent me a small library of books: Corporate Law for Dummies, The Art of Debt Acquisition, Strategic Finance. He treated it like a university course. We had late-night video calls where he'd grill me on terminology, on legal precedents, on the ethical implications of every potential move. "Your grandmother wasn't just rich, Maya," he told me one night, his face a serious, pixelated image on my laptop screen. "She was smart. She knew you couldn't fight a dragon with a butter knife. You need a sword, and more importantly, you need to know how to use it. This is your training. This is how you forge the sword." Our first official act was establishing the holding company. We called it Northgate Capital. It was the most boring, anonymous name we could conjure. A ghost entity, registered in Delaware, shielded by layers of legal protection that made it utterly untraceable back to me, the Whitmore estate, or anything familiar. Northgate Capital was the sword. Now it was time to learn how to wield it. I started small, as David advised. It was a way to test the waters. I authorized him to have Northgate buy a small, unsecured personal loan Rick had taken out from a payday lender a few years ago. It was a pittance, really, just a few thousand, but the interest rate was astronomical. Then we acquired a couple of my mother's maxed-out department store credit cards from a debt collection agency for pennies on the dollar. The process was fascinatingly impersonal to them. They just received dry, formal letters printed on cheap paper stating that their debt was now owned by some faceless corporation they'd never heard of. I pictured them glancing at the letters, scoffing at the name Northgate Capital, and then tossing them onto the ever-growing pile of bills on their kitchen counter. They wouldn't give it a second thought. For me, however, holding the file copies of those letters felt like holding the first captured pieces on a grand chessboard. The real test, the one that went beyond financial strategy and into the realm of character, came about a year into the siege. It was a move that would significantly escalate our campaign. David called me with a new file, his voice even more measured than usual. "There's an opportunity, Maya," he said, "a significant one." It seemed Rick and Logan had convinced a local investor to put up half the capital for their latest venture, some kind of high-tech automated dog walking service. The other half was financed through a substantial business loan, which Rick personally guaranteed. And it failed, I stated. It wasn't a question. It was the inevitable conclusion to any of Logan's schemes. "Spectacularly," David confirmed, a note of grim satisfaction in his tone. "The company is insolvent. The bank is calling in the loan, $150,000. We can acquire the debt from the bank for about 60 cents on the dollar. They're eager to get it off their books." It was a major piece of their financial puzzle. Taking control of this debt would give us immense leverage. But then David added the detail that changed everything. The detail that was meant to be my next test. "There's a complication," he said. "The local investor, the one who put up the other half of the money. His name is Frank Miller. He owns the local hardware store down the street from you. He's a friend of Rick's, or he was. He put his entire life savings into this venture. And worse," David continued, "he cross-collateralized the loan against his business." David paused. "When the bank forecloses, Rick will be hurt, but Miller will be wiped out. He'll lose everything, his store, his savings, everything." Frank Miller. My heart sank. I knew Frank, not well, but well enough. He was a good man, a pillar of the community. He always gave me a discount on supplies for the bookstore and asked how my day was, and he actually waited for the answer. He had a wife who battled a chronic illness, and 2 kids he was putting through state college. He was the definition of an innocent bystander, caught in the blast radius of my family's boundless incompetence and bottomless greed. That evening, I saw Frank at the local coffee shop. He looked 10 years older than he had a few months ago. His shoulders were slumped, his face etched with worry. He was staring into a cup of coffee as if it held the answers to the universe. I almost turned and walked out. But something compelled me to stay. I bought a coffee and sat a few tables away. I couldn't help but overhear him talking on the phone, his voice low and strained. "I just don't know what to do, honey," he was saying. "Rick won't even return my calls. It's all gone. Everything we saved." His voice broke and he quickly ended the call. Seeing his raw, unfiltered pain made it real. The documents on my desk weren't just numbers and legal clauses anymore. They were a man's life. The plan was brutally simple. Northgate acquires the debt, forecloses on the loan, and tightens the noose around Rick. But it would also destroy Frank Miller. It would destroy his family. My grandmother's voice in the letter was about justice, about enforcing reality. But was this justice? Wrecking a good man's life to punish a bad one? I imagined posing the same question to my family. I knew exactly what they'd say. Karen would call it unfortunate collateral damage. Rick would shrug and say, "That's just business. Frank should have known the risks." Logan would probably not even understand the ethical dilemma, too wrapped up in how the failure made him look. Their lack of empathy was a black hole, sucking all light and decency into it. And in that moment, my deepest fear wasn't of failing. It was of becoming them. For the first time in our working relationship, I pushed back hard against David Chun. I called him as soon as I left the coffee shop, my voice tight with a conviction I didn't know I possessed. "I can't do it, David," I said. "I won't. I will not be the reason Frank Miller loses his home and his business. There has to be another way. If there isn't, then this whole thing is off." I expected him to argue, to tell me I was being soft, emotional. I expected a lecture on the necessities of our strategy. Instead, the line was quiet for a long, heavy moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. It was warm and filled with an emotion I couldn't quite place. "This, Maya," he said softly, "is the test I was truly waiting for. This is the one Margaret would have cared about the most." Her contingency plan was always about leverage, not wanton destruction. It was about forcing them to face the consequences of their own actions, not about creating new victims. The choice was never just a binary, foreclose or don't. The real question was, what would you do? What kind of woman are you when given this kind of power? He was right. This wasn't my grandmother's test anymore. It was mine. The training wheels were off. I stayed up all night, fueled by stale coffee. My small office was littered with discarded notes. I wasn't a finance wizard, but I was a reader. I knew how to research. I dug into the books David had sent me. I looked up creative financing, debt restructuring, limited liability partnerships, legal firewalls. An idea, fragile at first, then gaining strength, began to take shape in my mind. It was complex, risky, and would require a delicate touch. I called David at dawn, my eyes gritty from lack of sleep, but my mind sharp and clear. Here's what we do, I said, the words coming fast and certain. Northgate acquires the full debt, but we don't foreclose. We legally restructure it. We create a legal firewall between the two guarantors. We offer Mr. Miller a separate, long-term, low-interest repayment plan for his portion to the investment, secured only against his original share. We leave his business and personal assets completely untouched. We give him a path to recovery. I took a breath. Then we isolate Rick's half of the debt. We take his personal guarantee and we nail it to his forehead. We let Miller off the hook and we put Rick squarely on it alone. It was complicated, definitely less profitable in the short term. It required more legal finesse and would cost more in billable hours. But it was the right thing to do. It was the decent thing to do. David Chun was silent for a full minute on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of him breathing. I held my own breath, waiting for his verdict. That's a very elegant solution, Maya, he finally said, and the undisguised pride in his voice was unmistakable. It's sophisticated. It's compassionate. It's exactly what she would have done. She would be very, very proud of you. He paused. I'll get the paperwork started immediately. When I hung up the phone, the sun was rising over the Vermont hills, casting a warm, golden light into my small, cluttered office. I felt a profound shift inside me, a settling in my bones. This was no longer just about following a plan left for me in a will. It wasn't about revenge. It was about building something. It was about wielding power with conscience. I had been given a sword, and I was finally learning that its purpose wasn't just to cut, but to carve out justice, to carve a path for myself that was entirely my own, and to methodically, carefully carve away the rot in my family, leaving them with nothing but the stark, undeniable, and inescapable truth of their own choices. The siege was no longer a defense. It had become a righteous advance. The next year was a slow, methodical tightening of the screws. With David Chun's guidance and my own growing confidence, Northgate Capital became a silent, creeping presence in my family's life. We bought their second mortgage from a regional bank that was eager to offload a non-performing asset. We bought a portfolio of their credit card debt from a third-party collector in a bulk deal. Every dry, formal letter they received, announcing that yet another of their debts had been consolidated and sold to this faceless, persistent entity, was another brick in the wall I was building around them, cutting off their escape routes one by one. They, of course, remained blissfully, willfully oblivious. In their minds, Northgate Capital was just another vulture, a symptom of their run of bad luck, never the root cause. Their conversations, which I was still occasionally subjected to during begrudging holiday visits and guilt-trip phone calls, were a masterclass in self-delusion and blame-shifting. Can you believe the interest rate this Northgate company is charging? Rick would fume over a dry Christmas turkey. It's completely predatory. There ought to be a law against this. Someone should sue them. It's the economy, dear, Karen would say, sighing dramatically as if she were a character in a tragic play. It's just so hard for honest, hardworking people like us to get ahead these days. Honest, hardworking. The words hung in the air, so starkly contrary to the reality I was seeing in their financial statements. The charges for spa days, the golf club membership fees, the non-refundable deposits for Logan's latest doomed venture, an app that was supposed to let you rate public restrooms. The desperation, however, started to show in frayed edges around their carefully constructed facade. The designer labels Karen wore from last season, a cardinal sin in her social circle. The boasts about Logan's business prospects became more vague, shifting from imminent success to promising discussions. The air in their oversized mortgage-to-the-hilt house grew thick with tension that even the most expensive scented candles couldn't hide. They were sinking. And they were finally starting to realize that the water was cold and deep. One Saturday, I ran into Logan at the grocery store. I was in the cereal aisle, and he came around the corner pushing a cart that contained only a sad-looking frozen pizza and a six-pack of cheap beer. He saw me, and for a second he froze. The old familiar sneer started to form on his lips. "Well, well," he said, looking me up and down, taking in my simple jeans and flannel shirt. "If it isn't the captain of industry herself. How's the book business, big sis? Selling any bestsellers?" The jab lacked its usual sting. It felt rehearsed, tired, pathetic. "It's fine, Logan," I said calmly. "Pays the bills, right?" he scoffed, but his eyes darted away, unable to hold my gaze. "Must be nice, having no ambition, no stress." He gestured vaguely with his hand. "Out here in the real world, some of us are trying to build empires. It's a high-pressure game." I just looked at him. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. The silence stretched. And in that silence, his bravado crumbled. He suddenly seemed small, deflated. He mumbled something about needing to go and practically fled down the aisle, his cheap pizza rattling in the cart. He was projecting an image of success that not even he believed anymore. The family's desperation led them to deploy their secret weapon. My Aunt Patty, Karen's sister. Patty had always played the part of the neutral, sympathetic party in family disputes, the kindly Swiss diplomat. She'd call me every few months to check in, her voice dripping with syrupy concern. The call came on a Tuesday evening. "Oh, Maya, honey, I'm so worried sick about your mother," she began. Her tone was a perfect imitation of heartfelt anxiety. "She's not sleeping. Rick is a mess. They're just under so much pressure from this horrible Northgate company." I stayed silent, letting her play her hand. "She told me something, and it just broke my heart," Patty continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "She said they might have to sell your grandmother's old pearl necklace. You remember it, don't you? The one she wore to your high school graduation." I froze. My hand tightened on the phone. The pearl necklace. It was one of the few things of Margaret's that held real, profound sentimental value for me. I remembered her wearing it on special occasions. It was elegant, timeless, understated. Just like her. "They're selling it?" I asked, my voice tight, the bait taken. "Well, they're talking about it," Patty said, and I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, sensing a victory. "They feel they have no choice. It would kill them to do it, but what can they do? Unless, of course, some other solution came up. A little help from family, maybe? I know you've always been so good with your money, Maya." It was a trap, carefully, cruelly baited. She wasn't just checking in. She was fishing, on Karen's behalf, reporting back, trying to see if the disappointing daughter had a secret nest egg they could crack open. And they were using my love for my grandmother as the lever. The cold fury I felt was sharp and clarifying. This was who they were. There were no depths they wouldn't sink to. I took a deep breath, pushing the emotion down, replacing it with ice. "That's a shame," I said, my voice carefully, deliberately devoid of all emotion. "It's a beautiful piece, but I suppose it's their property now. They have to do what they feel is right." The silence on Patty's end was long and telling. It was the sound of a fisherman reeling in an empty line. I had failed her test. I hadn't offered to buy the necklace. I hadn't offered to send money. I hadn't taken the bait. "Oh," she finally said, her voice flat, all the fake concern gone. "Well, I just thought you should know." The line clicked dead. The final act of their downfall was, in a way, heartbreakingly mundane. After being rejected for a debt consolidation loan by every mainstream bank, Rick, in a last-ditch, desperate effort, went to a small local credit union. He was denied. The loan officer, a young man who probably made less in a year than Rick had once spent on a golf club membership, looked at his catastrophic debt-to-income ratio and politely but firmly showed him the door. That was the last nail in their financial coffin. They had run out of credit, out of favors, out of road. A few weeks later, a certified letter arrived at my apartment. It was from them. Not a phone call, not a text, a formal, typed letter. It was a stilted, awkwardly worded plea for a significant familial loan to help them avoid imminent and catastrophic financial restructuring. It was the most cowardly, impersonal cry for help I could possibly imagine. I read it once, then folded it neatly and placed it in the Harrison file, which was now several inches thick and heavy with the weight of their bad decisions. I didn't reply. 2 more weeks passed in silence. Then the inevitable call came, from Rick. His voice wasn't angry or booming. It was thin, wrecked, the sound of a man completely and utterly defeated. We we have to file, Maya, he said, the words catching in his throat like fish bones. For bankruptcy. Chapter 7. We're losing the house. We're losing everything. He paused, and I could hear him take a shaky, ragged breath. I thought you should hear it from me. I waited for the guilt, the pang of pity, the urge to save him. But there was nothing, just a quiet, cold calm. They had made their choices. They had ignored every off-ramp, every warning sign. They had driven themselves at full speed toward this cliff with their eyes wide open, and now they were going over it. I'm sorry to hear that, Rick, I said, and the words were true, but not in the way he thought. I was sorry it had come to this. I was sorry they were the people they were. I hope things work out for you. I hung up the phone. The eye of the storm had passed. The final confrontation was no longer a possibility. It was an appointment, and it was set on the court docket for a Tuesday in June. Courtroom 4B. The courtroom was exactly as you'd imagine it, a place designed to strip you of all individuality and hope. It was an antiseptic, soulless room painted a shade of institutional beige that seemed to actively absorb light. The air was still and smelled faintly of old floor polish, stale coffee, and raw human anxiety. A towering American flag stood in the corner, looking down on the proceedings with a kind of stoic indifference. I sat in the back row on a hard wooden bench, wearing a simple dark gray suit I'd bought for the occasion. It was the most expensive piece of clothing I'd ever owned, and it felt less like a costume and more like armor. I had arrived early, wanting to observe. I watched as other cases were called, a sad parade of human misery, a young couple who had lost everything to medical bills, an old man whose small business had been crushed by a new superstore. Each story was a tragedy in miniature. My family's case, I realized, was different. Theirs was not a tragedy. It was a self-inflicted wound. Then I saw them enter. My family. They were huddled together as they walked down the aisle, a tight, defensive unit against a world that had finally turned on them. They looked small and lost under the high ceilings and fluorescent lights. Karen's usually perfect hair was slightly disheveled, a few strands escaping her lacquered helmet. Rick's face was pale and puffy, his shoulders slumped in his ill-fitting suit jacket, the knot of his tie slightly askew. And Logan just stared at the floor, his usual cocksure arrogance completely gone, replaced by a vacant, hollow look. They looked like strangers, shipwrecked and washed ashore in a hostile land they didn't recognize. Their lawyer, a young, overwhelmed public defender named Mr. Davies, met them and began whispering instructions, his expression grim. When Karen finally looked up and saw me sitting in the back, her eyes narrowed into slits of pure venom. She nudged Rick, who followed her gaze. His face hardened. I could read their thoughts as clearly as if they'd shouted them across the room. She came to gloat. The ungrateful, spiteful brat came to watch us burn. I simply met their gaze, held it for a steady, unnerving moment, and then looked away. My expression was a carefully constructed mask of neutrality. I wasn't here to gloat. Gloating was their game, a sport for the insecure. I was here to end the game. Docket number 734, the bailiff's voice boomed. The bankruptcy petition of Richard and Karen Harrison. My family and their lawyer shuffled to the defense table. The bankruptcy trustee, a tired-looking woman named Miss Albright, with sharp eyes and glasses perched on the end of her nose, began the proceedings. She droned on in a monotone, listing assets and liabilities. The numbers were staggering, even to me, and I had seen the files. The primary mortgage on their house, the second mortgage, 2 car loans, multiple business loans, personally guaranteed by Rick, a dozen maxed-out credit cards. It was a stunning monument to a life lived on fantasy and credit. Mr. Davies, their lawyer, kept shuffling his papers, his face a mask of misery. He was a man armed with a shield against a tidal wave. He made a few weak arguments about predatory lending, about the difficult economy, but his words lacked conviction. He knew, as everyone in the room knew, that this was a hopeless case. Finally, Ms. Albright looked up from her mountain of documents. "We now turn to the creditors," she announced, her voice cutting through the stale air. "The court notes that the primary creditor, holding the vast majority of this consolidated debt, is a single corporate entity named Northgate Capital. Is there a representative for Northgate Capital present in the courtroom?" A hush fell over the room. This was the moment. My family stiffened. This was the faceless monster. the boogeyman they'd been cursing for months, the source of all their problems. It was about to get a name and a face. Their lawyer, Mr. Davies, looked around the room, a confused, helpless frown on his face. He clearly had no idea who he was up against. Slowly, deliberately, a figure rose from the row in front of me. It was David Chun. He was immaculate in a dark navy suit, his silver hair perfectly combed. His presence commanded a quiet authority that immediately silenced the whispers in the gallery. A wave of profound confusion washed over Karen and Rick's faces. What was Margaret's lawyer doing here? What possible connection could he have to this? I saw Karen lean over and whisper frantically to Rick, who just shook his head, his expression blank with incomprehension. David walked to the front of the courtroom and placed his fine leather briefcase on the plaintiff's table. "Good morning, Your Honor," he said, his voice calm and clear, filling the room with an easy confidence. "I am David Chun. I am the legal counsel for Northgate Capital." The shock on my mother's face was almost comical. It was a mixture of disbelief, fear, and utter confusion. She looked from Chun to Rick and back again, her mouth opening and closing silently like a fish on a hook. She was trying to connect the dots, but the picture made no sense to her. The man who had managed her own mother's estate was now representing the company that was destroying her. David continued, addressing the trustee. "Your Honor, Northgate Capital has reviewed the petitioner's case. We are prepared to make a proposal regarding the restructuring of the Harrison family's debt, an alternative to a full Chapter 7 liquidation. However, my client, the sole owner and chairwoman of Northgate Capital, wishes to present the terms herself." Miss Albright, the trustee, looked over her glasses at David, her interest clearly piqued. "This is somewhat irregular, Mr. Chun," she said, "but the court is amenable. Is your client present?" "She is, Your Honor," David said. He then turned his head slightly, almost imperceptibly, and looked directly at me. It wasn't a smile. It was a signal. A simple, silent nod that said, "The stage is yours." Time seemed to slow down. Every sound in the room amplified. The creak of the old wooden benches, the rustle of Mr. Davies's papers, the frantic, shallow breathing of my mother. I pushed myself to my feet. The suit no longer felt like armor. It felt like my own skin. Every single eye in the room swiveled toward me. The journey from the back pew to the front of the courtroom was the longest walk of my life. With each step on the worn linoleum floor, I felt a lifetime of being overlooked, of being underestimated, of being the quiet disappointment. Fall away from me. I wasn't the ghost at their table anymore. I was the most solid, most real person in the room. I saw their faces as I walked, the confusion on my family's faces curdling into utter, slack-jawed disbelief. It was a look I would remember for the rest of my life, the look of a world turning completely, irrevocably upside down. I didn't look at them as I passed their table. I kept my eyes fixed forward, on the trustee, on the empty seat beside David Chun. When I reached the table, I pulled out the chair and sat down. I placed my hands on the cool, polished wood, my fingers steady. Then, and only then, did I allow myself to turn my head and look directly at them. Karen's face was as white as a sheet, her hand clamped over her mouth as if to physically hold in a scream. Rick looked like he'd been punched in the gut, all the air and bluster forced out of him. His face was a ghastly shade of gray. And Logan was staring at me with the wide, uncomprehending eyes of a child who had just seen a ghost. In that moment, he didn't see his nerdy, disappointing older sister. He saw a stranger, a woman with all the power, a queen on a throne he never knew existed. I turned my attention back to the trustee, Ms. Albright, who was now looking at me with a newfound, intense curiosity. I gave her a small, respectful nod. "Good morning," I said, and my voice was steady, clear, and calm. It didn't even tremble. "My name is Maya Harrison. I am the owner of Northgate Capital." The silence that followed was absolute, profound. It was the sound of a universe breaking. The sound of a lifetime of lies and delusions and arrogant assumptions shattering into a million pieces. It was the sound of reality, cold and hard and undeniable, finally arriving. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The truth was loud enough to shake the entire room. In the sterile, ringing quiet of the courtroom, my words hung in the air, solid and irrevocable. The trustee, Ms. Albright, a woman who had clearly seen every form of human desperation, simply took off her glasses, polished them with a cloth, and put them back on. Her gaze sharpened. She looked from me to the stunned, shattered faces of my family, and then back to me. A flicker of something unreadable. Was it understanding? Respect? Passed through her eyes. Very well, Ms. Harrison, she said. The court acknowledges you. Please proceed with your proposal. The legal formalities that followed were a blur to my family, but a carefully choreographed performance by David and me. David handled the specifics. His voice, a calm, professional drone that stood in stark, brutal contrast to the emotional wreckage at the defense table. He spoke of asset transfers, of debt consolidation, of the unquestionable legal authority that Northgate Capital now held over every single financial aspect of their lives. I didn't need to say another word. The power shift was complete, witnessed and ratified by the United States Bankruptcy Court. When the proceedings were finally adjourned, Ms. Albright directed us to a small, windowless conference room down the hall to discuss the terms of the proposal. The word proposal felt like a dark joke. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a sentencing. The five of us, me, David, and the three Harrisons, sat around a cheap laminate table under a buzzing fluorescent light. Their lawyer, Mr. Davies, hovered near the door, looking miserable and profoundly useless, knowing his job was now simply to explain to his clients how comprehensively they had been outmaneuvered. My family wouldn't look at me. They stared at the scuffed surface of the table, at the water stains on the ceiling tiles, anywhere but at the daughter and sister who now held their entire world in the palm of her hand. I let the silence stretch out. A tactical decision. I wanted them to sit in it, to feel the full weight of their new, uncomfortable reality. Finally, when the silence had become a heavy, suffocating blanket, I slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It stopped directly in front of Rick. "This is the deal," I said, my voice flat, devoid of triumph or anger. It was the voice of a businesswoman closing a transaction. "It's the only deal on the table. There is no alternative, except for me to instruct the trustee to proceed with a full Chapter 7 liquidation, which would leave you with nothing but the clothes on your backs and a black mark on your credit for the next decade." Rick's hand trembled as he reached for the paper. He read it, his face growing paler, if that was even possible, with every line. Karen leaned over his shoulder, her eyes scanning the text, her breath coming in short, sharp hisses of disbelief. The terms were simple, and for them they were brutal. 1. They would sell the house immediately. A realtor chosen by Northgate Capital would handle the sale to ensure it was sold at market value. The proceeds would go directly to my company to pay down a fraction of their staggering debt. 2. They would move into a 2-bedroom apartment in Worcester that Northgate Capital had already secured. The lease was in our name. The rent would be paid for the first 6 months, a period of transition. After that, they were on their own. 3. Rick and Karen, both in their late 50s, would be required to find and maintain full-time employment, any legal job. A significant portion of their post-tax income would be garnished until a certain threshold of the debt was repaid. They were also required to attend mandatory weekly financial counseling sessions with a counselor approved by me. A report of their attendance and progress would be sent to my office. Non-compliance would result in immediate legal action. For Logan, the golden child, he would get a full-time minimum wage job. No more startups, no more ventures, no more living off his parents. He would work 40 hours a week, and 70% of his paycheck would be garnished and go directly to Northgate Capital. This was not negotiable. Rick dropped the paper on the table as if it had physically burned him. You can't do this," he whispered, his voice pleading. This is cruel, Maya. We're your family." "No," I said, leaning forward slightly, forcing him to meet my eyes for the first time. "Cruel is spending money you don't have for 20 years. Cruel is letting your son believe he's a genius while he bankrupts you and everyone around him. Cruel is dismissing your daughter, her entire life, because her quiet ambition doesn't fit your glossy fantasy." I tapped the paper with one finger. "This isn't cruelty. This is reality. It's a world where actions have consequences. It's the world I've been living in all along. Now it's simply your turn to join me in it." That's when Karen finally broke. The shock wore off, replaced by a tsunami of pure, unadulterated rage. Her head snapped up, her eyes blazing with a hatred so intense it was almost a physical force. "You planned this?" she shrieked, her voice cracking, all pretense of sophistication gone. "All of it? That quiet, wounded little act you put on for years? You were plotting this all along, you little snake. After everything we did for you, we gave you a home, we fed you. Everything you did for me? The words were out before I could stop them, cold and sharp as a shard of glass. What exactly did you do for me, Mom? Besides the bare legal minimum? Did you encourage me? Did you celebrate my successes? Did you ever once ask about my dreams? Or did you just see me as a quiet, convenient piece of furniture in the background of Logan's life? I let the questions hang in the air, unanswered, because they were unanswerable. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. This isn't about revenge, I said, my voice dropping low again, pulling the emotion back in, locking it away. Revenge is a passion. This is a business decision. For years, you have been a bad investment. I am now simply forced to manage my assets. Logan, who had been silent until now, finally spoke, his voice a sullen mumble. So what? You're just going to ruin our lives and feel good about yourself? I'm not ruining your lives, I corrected him calmly. You three did that all on your own. I'm just ending the fantasy. I'm giving you the one thing you've never had, a foundation, a bottom. From here, you can either start climbing or you can stay there. The choice, for the first time, is entirely yours. I stood up. David Chun rose with me, a silent, imposing shadow at my side. You have 24 hours to sign the agreement, I said, looking directly at their lawyer, Mr. Davies. If I do not have a signed and notarized copy on my desk by noon tomorrow, I will instruct the trustee to proceed with a full Chapter 7 liquidation. You will be left with absolutely nothing. I turned and walked to the door without a backward glance. As my hand touched the cool metal of the doorknob, Rick's voice, broken and pleading, called out from behind me. Maya, please, daughter. I paused for a heartbeat, my back still to them. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. If I saw his face, if I let one shred of the old, misplaced pity in, the foundation I had so carefully built for myself might crack. You lost the right to call me that a long, long time ago, Rick, I said to the closed door. And then I walked out, leaving them behind in the ruins of the world they had built. The air in the hallway felt fresh, clean. It was the first breath of a new life, my life. The 18 months that followed were a study in quiet observation and detached management. I didn't see my family. I didn't speak to them. There were no angry phone calls, no pleading emails. The new reality was absolute, and they knew it. My only connection to their lives was through the sterile, factual reports that landed on my desk from David Chun's office and the financial counselor I had assigned them. The house, the monument to their fantasy life, was sold in less than a month. The realtor I'd hired was ruthlessly efficient. I saw the listing photos online before it sold. The rooms were empty, stripped of their gaudy furniture and personal effects. They echoed with the ghosts of their former life, of cocktail parties and hollow laughter. I reviewed the closing statement. The amount they cleared after paying off the first mortgage barely made a dent in the mountain of secondary debt they owed to Northgate Capital. It was a sobering testament to how deeply they had been living in the red. They moved into the 2-bedroom apartment in Worcester. It was in a clean, safe, but utterly unremarkable complex. I had chosen it specifically for its aggressive blandness. There were no cathedral ceilings, no granite countertops, no walk-in closets. It was just a place to live. The reports from the financial counselor, a no-nonsense woman named Mrs. Gable, were clipped and professional. They arrived every Monday morning like clockwork. Karen and Rick Harrison attended their weekly session on October 14th. Topic: creating a weekly food budget. Karen was resistant and tearful. Rick was passive and deferred to his wife. Or a month later. Logan Harrison's paycheck from Pet Paradise has been received via direct deposit. 70% of the net amount has been automatically allocated to Northgate Capital as per the agreement. Pet Paradise. I couldn't help but feel a flicker of grim irony. The tech genius, the next Steve Jobs, was now cleaning hamster cages and stocking 50-pound bags of dog food. One cold Saturday afternoon, about a year after the hearing, I found myself in Worcester. A rare book collector had a stall at a local flea market, and I had driven down on a whim. After finding the book, I had some time to kill. Curiosity, a powerful and sometimes morbid force, got the better of me. I drove by the strip mall where Pet Paradise was located, and I saw him. Logan was outside, struggling to carry a large, wriggling bag of dog food into the store. He was thinner than I remembered, and the designer clothes were gone, replaced by a simple, faded red polo shirt with the store's leaping puppy logo on it. His face, when he turned, was sullen and hard. The arrogant smirk was gone, replaced by a permanent look of weary resentment. Our eyes met through the glass door. For a second, I saw a flash of the old familiar hatred, but it was fleeting. It was immediately replaced by something else, something I hadn't seen in him before: weary resignation. He just looked tired, exhausted by the sheer, unyielding weight of reality. He gave a short, almost imperceptible nod, not of greeting, but of acknowledgement, then turned and disappeared into the store. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a truce. It was the silent acknowledgement of a new hierarchy. He saw me, and he knew precisely who was in charge. A few weeks later, another report from Mrs. Gable contained a surprising footnote. Rick Harrison reported that he has been promoted to shift supervisor on the night security team at the local warehouse. Karen Harrison has taken on extra hours as a cashier at the grocery store to qualify for the employee discount. They were complying. They were working, not out of some newfound enlightenment or moral awakening, but out of the cold, hard logic of survival. The abstract concept of a budget had become the concrete reality of rent is due on the first. Their fantasies had finally starved to death, and in their place, a grudging pragmatism had taken root. The most profound moment of this entire period, however, didn't come from a report or a fleeting observation. It came from my grandmother's mahogany box. I had kept it in my office, a constant, tangible reminder of where this all began. One evening, as I was organizing my desk, I felt a slight unevenness in the velvet lining. I pressed down, and a section of the bottom clicked open, revealing a hidden compartment. Prying it open with a letter opener, I found something I hadn't seen before: a small, worn, leather-bound journal. It was her diary. Her handwriting, the same elegant script from the letter, filled its pages. I opened it with trembling hands, a feeling of reverence washing over me. The entries were from over 40 years ago, shortly after she'd married my grandfather, a time when she was young and full of hope. I read about her dreams for her family, her love for my grandfather, and then I found the entry that explained everything. The entry that was the key to understanding the legacy she had truly left me. October 12th, the journal read. I refused to give my brother Robert money for his surefire investment in an ostrich farm for the last time today. He called me cruel. He called me heartless. He said I had turned my back on my own family, on my own blood. My parents, God help them, sided with him. They told me my responsibility as the successful one was to lift them all up with me. I tried to explain that giving him more money wasn't lifting him up. It was enabling him to drown more slowly. It was a slow poison, and I would not administer it any longer. They didn't listen. They told me that if I couldn't support my family, then I wasn't part of it. My breath caught in my throat. She had lived this. She had faced the same impossible choice. I kept reading, my eyes flying across the page. October 19th, she wrote. A week later. It is the loneliest feeling in the world to choose reality over the comfort of a shared family illusion. They have cut me off. Robert is not speaking to me. My mother's calls are filled with guilt and accusation. But I know, deep in my bones, that I am right. I will not fund their fantasies. I will not set myself on fire to keep them warm. I will build my own reality, brick by brick. And if I am to be alone in it, then so be it. I would rather be alone with the truth than surrounded by comforting, expensive lies. Tears streamed down my face, hot, silent tears of grief and understanding. It wasn't just a strategy she had left me in her journals. It was her story, her pain, her validation. She hadn't just given me a sword to fight my own battle. She had shown me her own scars from a war she had fought, and won long ago. My journey wasn't one of simple revenge against my family. It was one of profound spiritual solidarity with her. I was finishing a story she had started half a century ago. I closed the journal, my heart aching with a deep, powerful connection to the woman I had loved and missed so much. I finally understood the true weight of my inheritance. It wasn't the 36 million, it was her legacy. The legacy of choosing the hard, lonely truth over the easy, popular lie. A few weeks later, an email appeared in my inbox. The sender was an address I didn't recognize at first. Then I realized it was Logan's. The subject line was blank. The body of the email had no greeting, no sign-off. Just a single stark sentence. The monthly wage report has been submitted as per the agreement. It was the coldest, most impersonal email I had ever received in my life. And yet, it felt like the most honest communication he had ever sent me. It was a statement of fact, an acceptance of consequence. It was the first brick he had ever laid in his own new reality. And for him, I realized with a startling clarity, That was a monumental, revolutionary step. 3 more years passed. The world kept turning. The seasons in Vermont changed with their reliable rhythm. The reports from the financial counselor eventually stopped. The file closed. The required payments from my family, managed through automated bank transfers and wage garnishments, were fulfilled. The contract, the cold, hard document that had reshaped their lives, was for all intents and purposes complete. They were on their own. For real this time. No safety net. No one to blame but themselves. I heard things through the grapevine, through Aunt Patty, who now treated me with a strange, fearful respect. Rick was still a shift supervisor for the security company, a steady, if unglamorous job. Karen was managing the floral department at the grocery store, a position where her eye for aesthetics was, for the first time, a productive asset. Logan, in the most surprising turn of all, had been promoted to assistant manager at Pet Paradise. He had, it seemed, discovered a quiet competence he never knew he possessed, when there were no other options. They were surviving. They were living in the world of consequence. And that, I decided, was enough. Tonight, I'm sitting in my old office at the back of the bookstore. I never sold the store. I couldn't. It's the place where my new life began. The crucible where I was forged. It's my anchor to who I was and who I have become. The store is quiet now, closed for the night. The smell of old paper, ink, and binding glue is the same as it always was. It is the smell of peace. Across the small, cluttered table from me, David Chun sips his tea. He's more than a lawyer now. He's a mentor, a confidant, a friend. He is the family I chose. Maria, my wonderful, sharp-witted colleague who still works the front counter, is here too, telling a hilarious story about a ridiculous customer that has David, a man I once thought incapable of anything but a stern frown, chuckling warmly. We're celebrating tonight. Not a business deal. Not a financial victory. We're celebrating the 5-year anniversary of the bookstore's new community literacy program, a program I quietly funded through a foundation I started with my grandmother's money. It helps local kids learn to read, to find their own stories, to build their own worlds. Looking at them, the simple, genuine warmth in this small room, I finally understand the last part of my grandmother's wisdom. She told me to let them think I had nothing. And then, when the time came, to show them I had everything. For so long I thought everything meant the money, the power, the final crushing victory at that bankruptcy hearing. I was so wrong. Everything is this quiet peace, this ability to build something good and real in the world, the freedom from the crippling need for approval from people who were utterly incapable of giving it, the strength to choose your own family, your own reality. Everything wasn't what I took from them. It was what I built for myself in the space that was left after I finally, truly let them go. My true inheritance wasn't the $36 million. It was the wisdom to understand that real wealth isn't what you have in the bank. It's a life you don't need to escape from. So if you've made it this far, thank you. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it touched you in some way. It was a long and difficult road, but it was my road. And walking it led me here. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to make a tough choice to protect your own peace, your own reality? I'd be honored to read your story. Please share it in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's next. Because sometimes letting go is how you begin, and silence can be the loudest kind of power. Thanks again. My name is Maya Harrison, and I finally know who I am.